Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'll be doing a little bit differently than the other trade videos I've done so far this season. It's week 11 here, which is really commonly the trade deadline for a lot of leagues. It's like the default trade deadline on Yahoo, ESPN. I've got several leagues with trade deadlines this week, and it's a really great opportunity to sort of evaluate what the best way to go about looking for trades is, sort of understanding what you should be looking to accomplish when you're trading, and really trying to highlight which players we should be targeting based off of where our teams are at. So hopefully you guys find this video useful. Of course, obviously, I'm not going to capture every single player that makes sense. So, of course, if you end up with any specific questions, just let me know in the comments below. I love seeing what you guys have there. The more context you guys give me, the better information I can give you guys as well. So, just really fun with all that. I love trading. It's one of my favorite things to do in fantasy. Trade deadlines are always almost a little bit sad for me because it's one of my favorite things to do every single week is look for those trades I can make. And after this, it's just tough to do that. But I think it should be a lot of fun here. I'll highlight players that across every single position that I'd be looking to target. And then, of course, if you guys do have any additional questions, just let me know in the comments below. And yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Let's get into it. So just going to start out with some general tips and tricks here, especially for evaluating what you want to be looking for in trading here. The number one thing I really want to highlight, and this goes pretty much all throughout the season, but knowing what you need, especially just based off of where your team is at, really gives you a leg up in your trade negotiations. So, for example, if you're 7-3 or better, you're going to make the playoffs. Like if you've got 7 wins already, 7 wins, 7 to 8 wins, normally like the bare minimum to get you guys into the playoffs. That puts you at 500 or better over the course of the season. If you're 7-3, 8-2, 9-1, you're going to make the playoffs. And I think it's at that point better to make sure that we're prioritizing playoff schedules. So you can look to those teams that really need to win now, offer them some more immediate production so that you can really sort of stack that production that you want in the back half of the season and the back half of the playoffs. Of course, it's a little bit different if you're playing for a bye. If leagues have byes, you do want to make sure you're vying for that 1 or 2 seed because that is obviously very important. But still want to make sure that we're prioritizing success in those playoff weeks because those are obviously the weeks that we want to make sure we're playing well. If you're 4-6, 3-7, you're not dead. Even 3-8 probably, or 2-8, not necessarily dead, but you got to win out at that point. So you really need to make sure that you're prioritizing the upcoming weeks. Just keep track of upcoming matchups. Make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure that you are going to win those games because it doesn't matter how good your playoff schedule is if you don't make it. It doesn't matter how well your team does there. Then if you're on the edge there, if you're 5-5, 6-4. It's tougher to know there. I generally try to prioritize the next couple weeks to make sure that I'm getting myself into the playoffs, but you do want to make sure that you're at least keeping in mind guys that are going to be good over the course of the next few weeks and in the playoffs. So examples of that are like the Titans have a great schedule in general for wide receivers going forward, so Calvin Ridley is a good target for you guys there. The Cardinals in general, so like Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison, we'll talk about them in this video, but they're good for the next several weeks and in the playoffs. So those kinds of trades make a lot more sense if you're sort of on the edge there. Then, of course, similar to knowing what you need, it's important to look around your league and see what other teams around your league need. So if you're 4-6, 3-7, look at the teams that are 7-3, 8-2. Look to those guys. Maybe you've got a couple injured players. Say you've got Isaiah Pacheco in a league and you're 3-7. You can't wait for Pacheco to come back. See if you can package him in some sort of deal with one of those teams. See if you can get a player that can help you now because it doesn't matter if Pacheco comes back and is awesome. If you lose this week, if you lose each of their next 2 games, it doesn't matter. And passing them on to a team that can't afford to eat those couple weeks just it makes a lot of sense for both teams. And then one other thing I like to highlight as well, just know your own schedule. It's something I like to do. Like, for example, I've got a team. I'm 4-6 in a league right now, right on the edge of trying to make the playoffs. I'm like in 7th place right now, 1 place out. I really want to make sure that I'm making sure that I make my way into the playoffs. So I've got Josh Allen and James Cook in that league. I'm looking to my opponent next week. That next week, Josh Allen, James Cook are on bye. I'm at least poking around to see if there's something that makes sense in terms of a way I can maybe package those players to that team, get better players back from him. Even if it's a slight downgrade, I'm passing on those bye weeks to my opponent and setting myself up really well to try and win those games that are going to be must-wins for me. So those are just some examples. Of course, we'll get into specific players as well here, but just wanted to highlight different things that you can look to do and prioritize in your trading so that you can make sure you're making trades that are going to be advantageous for yourself. So getting into the positional breakdowns here, I'm going to start off with some quarterbacks that I'd be looking to target for the playoffs. This is for those of you that are 7-3, 8-2. You feel really good about your odds of making the playoffs, and you just want to make sure that you're set for that playoff stretch. Kyler Murray really jumps off the board for me. He's on bye this week, so it should be a pretty easy bye for you people, especially if you've got a team that's 4-6 and 3-7 and it has Kyler. They're really going to be willing to move off of him to try and get some production this week, and they have a fantastic playoff schedule. They get matchups against the Patriots, the Panthers, and the Rams to close out the season. 3 straight really great matchups there. Kyler's playing lights out too, so Kyler's certainly trending up. I think Kyler is like my favorite target right now. It feels like a guy that really could be fantastic for us. Jordan Love as well. Been mediocre so far, so I don't think he'll cost you a whole lot. But he's coming out of his bye, gets the Seahawks, the Saints, and Vikings to close out the season. The Seahawks and Vikings are fantastic matchups. The Saints a little bit iffy because their offense can't normally keep up. But 2 of those 3 weeks, I think Jordan Love's got a shot to be a top 5 quarterback, and getting those kind of spike weeks in the playoffs is certainly something we want to prioritize. And then Jaden Daniels coming off of a bad game, still has a bye coming up, so it's easy to target him for those teams that are, in win now mode. They can't afford to hold on to Jaden Daniels through that bye week. In the fantasy playoffs, you're going to get the Saints, the Eagles, and the Falcons. Really great setup for those 3 weeks. I think Jaden Daniels could be a top 3 quarterback over that stretch, and really be a guy that helps take us over the top there. If you're on the other side of things, though, if you're 3-7, 4-6, 5-5, maybe you really need to make sure that you win out here, have a really good stretch over the last 4 games to make sure you do make the playoffs. I think Justin Herbert's the great priority at target for us. He's probably on waivers or at least very easily available here. The next 3 weeks, though, you get Cincinnati, Baltimore, and Atlanta. That's going to be 3 straight shootouts in all likelihood. He's playing really damn well right now, too. Quentin Johnson looks pretty good. Ladd McConkey's obviously coming into his zone. This is a good team right now. They're passing the ball a lot more than they were early on in the season, and those matchups are really exciting. So I do think Justin Herbert could come out and be a really solid asset for us. Jared Goff as well. Had a bad game last week, but 3 of the next 4 games should be fantastic. You get Jacksonville this week, Indianapolis next week, a tough one against Chicago in week 13, but then a home game against Green Bay in week 14. I think Jared Goff's a guy that if you're streaming the position, I really do want him on my roster because I think I'm going to feel really happy with him over at least 3 of the next 4 weeks. Then the final one here, going to be Brock Purdy. Has a really great setup here. He's pretty cheap right now, either on waivers or relatively cheap on the trade market, and he's got all his weapons back. God, sorry, I have to sneeze. Excuse me. So he's got all his weapons back here. Christian McCaffrey came back, obviously elevated the offense at least a little bit, caught the ball out of the backfield quite a bit. And the next 3 weeks, you get Seattle, Green Bay, and Buffalo. That sets up really nicely for some high-scoring games. And then week 14, not great, plays Chicago, so you don't love that one, but Purdy's going to be a guy that I think over the next 3 weeks can be a top 10 quarterback for you guys. And for those of you streaming the position, I think Purdy's a really solid asset and a guy that you can feel confident in at least 3 of the next 4 weeks to get you over the top here and get you to the playoffs. Moving on to the running back position here. Guys that I'd be looking to really emphasize trying to get on my roster for a sustained playoff production run here. Josh Jacobs has matchups against the Seahawks and the Saints in weeks 15 and 16. Those are 2 of the best matchups for opposing running backs, so that's just absolutely gorgeous. Does play the Vikings in week 17, which is not fantastic, but he catches the ball out of the backfield enough that I think he'll be totally fine. Packers offense is great. I'm not worried about that, and getting to week 17, that's really great, and just gotta have a shot there. So I think Josh Jacobs is going to carry some teams at least in weeks 15 and 16. Kyren Williams coming off of 2 straight mediocre games, so he's about as cheap as he's ever going to be, but gets to close out the season with San Francisco. That's not a great matchup. Then you get the Jets and the Cardinals. Really great setup there. 2 teams that haven't been able to stop the run very well lately, and get games that I really would expect to be honestly pretty high scoring, and I think Kyren's a guy that can be a top 5 running back over that stretch. And then James Conner has a bye week this week, so pretty affordable. And it's sort of the same thing with Kyler Murray here. You get New England, Carolina, and the Rams to close out the season. Really great setup there, especially New England and Carolina. James Conner could easily go out there and put up 150 and 2 in both of those games, and that's going to get you to the fantasy championship, and the Rams are not a matchup that scares me either. So great setup there for James Conner. I definitely want him on my roster if I've got a team that I think is really, really set up to do well in the playoffs here. On the flip side of things, if you need to win out, if you're 4-6, 5-5, got to make sure you string together some wins to get into the playoffs. I think Kareem Hunt's a really quality target here. Should be pretty cheap here because he's going to get replaced by Isaiah Pacheco at some point. They opened his 21-day window to be activated off IR, so we'll probably see Pacheco in 3 to 4 weeks. But that still means that over the next 3 to 4 weeks, you're getting what Kareem Hunt's done for you against really great matchups here. You get matchups against Buffalo, Carolina, the Raiders, and the Chargers. Really great setup there for Kareem Hunt. None of those matchups scare you. Kareem Hunt's been absolutely fantastic, even though he didn't score last week. He caught 6 passes for 60 yards. He's an involved part of this offense. The offense really runs through him and Travis Kelce at this point. So he's a guy that you can view as like a fringe top 12 running back over the next 4 weeks. And he's not going to cost you that at all if you really need to get some running back production here. It's about the cheapest running back production you're going to get. That should be really high end over the next 4 weeks. And then Tyrone Tracy has a bye this week, so that sucks. But afterwards, you're getting Tampa Bay, Dallas, and New Orleans. Dallas and New Orleans especially are fantastic setups for Tracy. I think he could be a guy that'll sort of just drag you into the playoffs. 2 straight games there, we could easily be a top 10 running back. And Probably not going to cost all that much. Again, he's on bye this week, so teams that are in win now mode might feel like they need to move him. And then, he's a Giant. People don't like having pieces of the Giants' offense. Tampa Bay is in a fantastic matchup out of that bye. But those final 2 weeks I think will be really great for Tracy, and he is someone I would feel really good about having on my roster if I need to put up together a run here. Moving on to some wide receivers that I think are going to have great performances in the fantasy playoffs. Malik Neighbors really stands out for me. Been awful lately, obviously. Hasn't been fantastic. Daniel Jones has played really poorly, but he has the single best schedule for fantasy wide receivers in the playoffs. You get Baltimore, Atlanta, and Indianapolis. Malik Neighbors is clearly an elite player. I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Giants at that point. It could be Drew Lock, it could be Daniel Jones, but really I just don't think it matters. These three defenses are teams that you can throw on almost regardless. Neighbors is an elite talent. He's a rookie. He should get better and better over the course of the season. I do think Malik Neighbors can be a top 12 wide receiver in the fantasy playoffs, and at this point he probably doesn't cost you that, especially the teams that are in win now mode and have him. He's on bye this week. It makes him a pretty easy trade target, and he is someone that I'd be really confident in going into the playoffs. Calvin Ridley, probably not going to be super cheap, but the schedule's awesome here. You get Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and Jacksonville. Second best schedule there for fantasy wide receivers. Really do think Calvin Ridley can just keep it going. He's a target hog right now since DeAndre Hopkins left. I think you can confidently start Calvin Ridley going forward. And then DJ Moore, this one might sound a little bit controversial. I know it's been absolutely awful here for him. The Chip Bears have not scored a touchdown for 23 offensive possessions. They just fired their offensive coordinator, and that's honestly why I'm at least a little bit optimistic here. New offensive coordinator, likely going to take some time to ramp up, so I don't think DJ Moore is a guy that I'm going to be stoked to play over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But in the fantasy playoffs, we get Minnesota, Seattle, and Detroit. That's a really great setup there. That's 3 straight games where I think I'm going to feel confident in starting DJ Moore. And like I said, he should be pretty free here. I wouldn't be shocked if we see DJ Moore hit waivers in some leagues. And I really do think he can be a guy that you're going to be satisfied with as a solid wide receiver 2 or 3 in the fantasy playoffs. Next, we got some wide receivers that I'd be targeting if I'm just looking to string together 3 to 4 wins here. George Pickens has the single best schedule for wide receivers over the next 4 weeks. You get Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and then Cleveland again. He's playing absolutely fantastic football right now. This is going to be a stretch of games where the Steelers are going to have to start scoring some points. Baltimore is the best matchup for opposing wide receivers right now. They're finding themselves in shootouts every single week, and George Pickens could probably just carry you to a win, at least in week 11 here. And Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, pretty good stretch there as well. So I really do think George Pickens can be a top 10 wide receiver the rest of the way. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, I want to highlight him. Their schedule over the next 4 weeks is fantastic. They're already through their bye, so that's great. And then you get Washington, the Rams, Baltimore, that's one we really want to target, and then the Panthers. 4 straight weeks, I'm going to feel really good about what the Eagles can do on offense. So both those guys are going to be really great the rest of the way. Marvin Harrison Jr., I want to highlight him. They do have a bye this week, so not fantastic. But after that, you get Seattle, Minnesota, and Seattle. I really think Marvin Harrison's going to be a top 5 receiver over those 3 weeks. I think he's going to drag some people into the playoffs with how good he is. Really think he's turning the corner here. You often see rookie wide receivers take that jump after their bye week. Cardinals had a late bye this year, bye in week 11, but after that, I really do think Marvin Harrison's going to come in and just absolutely light people up, and I think he's going to get you into the playoffs if you held on so far here. Moving on to some tight ends that I think are going to be great in the fantasy playoffs. Trey McBride, clearly an elite talent. They did try to get him a receiving touchdown this last week, threw a fade to him, just didn't quite connect, but they know that he hasn't had one yet. He's going to come at some point. He's a talented player. I still believe he's the most talented tight end in the NFL. He's on bye this week, so likely going to be a guy that you can afford. But again, the schedule in the fantasy playoffs, you get Patriots, Panthers, Rams for the Cardinals. The Cardinals are set up to be fantastic after the bye here. I think Trey McBride's really trending up here. This entire offense in Arizona is trending up, and I really want to get Trey McBride on my roster. So I would absolutely target trying to get him if you can. George Kittle, the 49ers are probably going to find themselves in a lot of shootouts going down the stretch here. The final 3 games of the fantasy season for us, we get the Rams, the Dolphins, and the Lions, especially that Lions matchup, that NFC Championship rematch from last year. Could easily see that game going over 50 total points. George Kittle's looked fantastic this season. They're going to have to move the ball a ton. No Brandon Ayuk. George Kittle's even more important to this offense. George Kittle's got a great shot to be the tight end 1 over the rest of the season, especially in that fantasy playoff stretch. And then Brock Bowers, his fantasy playoff stretch is absolutely fantastic here. You get the Falcons, the Jaguars, and the Saints. Also gets a great matchup against the Buccaneers in week 14 if you just need a little bump to get you in there. But Bowers coming out of his bye here, so you've got him the rest of the way. Rookie tight end should only get more involved coming out of the bye, get better over the course of the season. Brock Bowers has kind of had a little bit of a quiet stretch. I know he was fantastic to start the season. Still been good for a tight end standard here, but he hasn't necessarily put up those monster numbers that he was earlier on in the season. And I really think he's going to put together a great stretch near the end of the season here. And Bowers is a guy that I want to get on my roster for the fantasy playoffs. On the flip side here, in the last couple players we'll talk about, we've got some tight ends that I think will be great over the next 4 weeks and can help get you into the playoffs. Cade Otton has been fantastic over the last several weeks and has really established himself as an important part of this Buccaneers offense. They are on bye this week, so that's obviously not great, but Evans is going to return in week 12, should take a little bit of pressure off of Cade Otton, but Evans has never been like a hyper-targeted possession-type wide receiver. He's the downfield touchdown threat for this offense. He's not going to fill that Godwin role that Godwin was, and that's sort of what Cade Otton's had to fill, is that possession, close to the line of scrimmage guy, and I don't think that role goes away when Mike Evans comes back, and after that, you get the Giants, the Panthers, and the Raiders to close out the season here. That's just really fantastic here. I think you could really comment on any single Buccaneer, like Mike Evans should be great over that stretch. I think the Buccaneers defense is great. I think Rachaad White and Bucky Irving will have their games. I think I prefer Bucky the rest of the way, but in general, the Buccaneers are set up really great here after their bye, and I think Cade Otton's going to be a guy that might be relatively cheap. You could say, hey, he's on bye. Evans is coming back. He's not going to be as good as he's been. Can probably get him at a discount here, and I do think Otton's just going to continue being really good for them. And then Kyle Pitts, he's had 2 straight mediocre games, and he's on a bye next week, so makes him relatively affordable. But for the 3 weeks over the next 4 that he's not on bye, you get the Broncos, who they're a great defense, but they're not very good against opposing tight ends. So I think that's certainly something we could exploit there. The Chargers, pretty okay matchup, and the Vikings, a really great matchup for opposing tight ends. Really great 3-game stretch there. I think Kirk Cousins is going to have to play really well here. Drake London, not 100%. Kyle Pitts is going to be a super important part of this offense, and he's looked really good so far this season. Obviously, been his best year so far, I'd say, and I do think Kyle Pitts is in the line to potentially be a fringe top 5 tight end over the next 4 weeks, and I don't think he'll cost you that right now. So if you're really thin at tight end, I think he can give you the upside that you might need to get yourself into the playoffs this year. So that'll do it for the trade target video this week. Up next, I'll be going over starts and sits. I'll cover every single matchup this week, do what I can to get you guys locked and loaded, get those rosters set for the for your fantasy matchups in week 11. If you guys have any specific questions on the trades, anything that I mentioned here, let me know in the comments below. I love interacting with you guys there. Other than that, we'll have obviously a live stream Sunday morning. We've got starts and sits. There'll be 2 more videos this week. We do waivers, weekly recaps, trade videos every single week. So just make sure you subscribe to the channel that we don't miss any of the future content. And then if you made it this far in the video, just give it a thumbs up. It helps me out quite a bit. And I'll catch you with the next one, guys. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.